I never planned to become invisible in a company I built, but that's exactly what happened. 3 years ago, I sold my startup, a small software firm that built an AI logistics system, to a large corporation. It was a fair deal on paper. They got the tech, I got the payout, and they offered me a senior engineering role to stay through the transition. I said yes, mostly out of loyalty to the people who'd helped me get there. I thought I'd keep building, mentoring, maybe even shape the next version of what I'd created. What I didn't expect was to become a ghost in my own house. The day the merger went through, I lost my nameplate, my office, and my place in the room. They called me Ethan from DevOps, like I was a late addition to the team, someone who'd quietly joined mid-project. Most of the new hires were half my age, with business cards that had titles like Innovation Strategist or Product Vision Lead. They'd show up to meetings quoting my white papers, calling my old designs legacy code, and rewriting the same functions with fancier variable names. At first, it was funny. Then it was humiliating. Every Monday, there was this ritual stand-up meeting at 9 sharp. Our department head, a tall guy named Chris, loud voice, slick hair, perfect teeth, loved to go around the circle and inspire innovation. It was always the same speech. We're redefining what this product can do. He'd look straight at me for validation, and I'd nod, even when he was describing things we'd built 3 years ago. They didn't know who I was. Or maybe they did, and that was worse. One time, during a late sprint, a junior dev leaned over my desk and said, "Hey man, you really picked this stuff up fast. Were you part of the original team or something?" I just smiled. Something like that. There's a special kind of silence that happens when you realize people are using your work to prove how smart they are. It's not anger. It's a strange mix of irony and grief. Like watching someone repaint your old house and brag about how great their taste is. I stayed quiet, mostly because I didn't need to prove anything. My name was still on the original patent filing, buried under corporate paperwork, but it was there. Still, part of me wondered if I'd made a mistake, selling not just the company, but the right to matter inside it. Then came the project review. Chris strutted into the office like a politician at a press conference. "Big day, people. CEO wants to see the progress on the logistics suite. We'll be presenting to him and the client next Thursday." He pointed at the screen full of slides someone had made using my old diagrams, slightly rebranded, of course. "This," he said, tapping the graph, "is what's going to make us indispensable to the client." Us. He assigned me to tech support for the meeting. My job? Sit in the back and handle any system glitches while he and the CEO took the spotlight. I nodded, played along, no point arguing. But that night, as I was leaving the office, I overheard something. Chris and another manager talking by the vending machine. "Dude, make sure that old guy doesn't talk during the pitch," one said, laughing. "He goes on these tangents about the system like he invented it." The other snorted. "Yeah, we'll keep him quiet. The client wants energy, not lectures." I walked past them like I hadn't heard. My heart didn't even race. It just slowed down, steady, quiet. There's a point where disrespect stops surprising you and just becomes data. The next morning I came in early. No one was there yet. I stood in front of the big presentation board, the one covered in buzzwords like AI synergy pipeline and predictive delivery flow. My old code was under every one of those slides. I'd built it to solve real problems, to make truck routes smarter, fuel usage lower, deliveries faster. It wasn't fancy. It just worked. Now it was a prop. I stared at the company logo printed across the bottom. The new logo, not mine, and something inside me clicked. Not anger, just awareness. I wasn't supposed to be part of the team anymore. I was a placeholder, a story they'd borrowed without asking. Still, I decided to show up to that meeting. If they wanted a silent engineer in the corner, I'd be the best damn silent engineer they'd ever seen. Thursday arrived. Big conference room, bright lights, polished glass table. The CEO, a man who'd never spoken to me directly, was there with his entourage. Across from him sat the client. 3 people from a global logistics firm that had just signed a potential multi-million-dollar deal. I recognized one of them instantly. Mark Reynolds, VP of Operations. Someone I'd exchanged emails with years ago, back when I still ran my company. He didn't recognize me, not yet. Chris opened with a big grin. "We're thrilled to have you here, Mr. Reynolds. You're going to love what our platform can do." He started running through slides, talking fast, smiling wider every time the CEO nodded. The room smelled like confidence and cologne. I sat at the edge of the table, hands folded, laptop ready, invisible. At one point, the client leaned forward. "This predictive model, it's really accurate. How did you train it?" Chris glanced at me. "Our data science team used proprietary methods," he said quickly, skipping over the question. I stayed quiet, but Mark kept looking at the slides, then at me, his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said, finally pointing. "That dashboard, I've seen that layout before. Weren't you guys part of... what was the name?" The CEO jumped in. "Yes, the design was inspired by several earlier systems, but this version is entirely ours." Mark didn't look convinced. His eyes moved to me again, slower this time, and then he said it. "I'm sorry. What's your name?" Every head turned. Chris froze. "Ethan," I said quietly. Mark's face changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened. "Ethan Cole?" The room went still. Even the projector fan seemed to pause. I nodded once. He sat back in his chair, studying me like a memory that had just come back into focus. Then he looked at the CEO. "Wait a second. You're telling me the guy who built this system is sitting in the back row?" The silence was perfect, and that was just the beginning. Chris laughed first, a tight little sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Reynolds, Ethan supports the team. He didn't build this by himself." Mark didn't smile. "I didn't say by himself. I asked why he's in the back row." The CEO cleared his throat, the diplomatic version of a shove. "Let's stay on track. Our vision..." Mark raised a hand, still looking at me. "How did you train the model to handle empty miles on seasonal lanes?" Chris tried to catch my gaze like he could order my silence with a look. I answered anyway, even factual. "We weighted by live tender acceptance and driver hours, not just historical volume. The seasonality curve was breaking the forecast, so we filtered by carrier behavior and ran a second pass on lanes that look stable but aren't." "And the anomaly that looked like fraud 2 summers ago?" Mark asked. "Gas station cluster off I-40. We flagged it by time to pump versus odometer deltas. It wasn't fraud. Bad sensors." He exhaled through his nose like he'd been holding that detail for years. Then he sat back. "Right." The CEO clapped his hands softly. "Excellent institutional knowledge. Now, as I was saying..." But that was just the beginning. The rest of the deck went fast after that, but the mood shifted. Every time Chris said, "We pioneered," Mark's eyes flicked to me like a lie detector. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't have to. The room was doing the math. Halfway through, the CEO announced a performance culture slide. He loved this one. A glossy pyramid with words like ownership and excellence. He nodded toward me, casual, almost bored. "And of course, we've had to make hard calls. Some legacy staff haven't met our current bar." I knew the line before he finished it because HR had already rehearsed it on me 2 weeks prior. I'd been placed on a performance improvement plan with measurable goals that had nothing to do with performance. Attendance at innovation lunches, mandatory trainings about tools I had written the docs for, a clause about presentation energy, no metrics about outages avoided, fuel saved, routes stabilized, just vibes. I let him talk. The slide disappeared. The next one came up. Case studies. Mark held up a finger. "Back to that performance comment." The CEO's smile froze. "Yes? Is this one of those make room for new talent situations?" "We evaluate fairly," the CEO said. "We can't have bottlenecks." Mark's eyes moved to me. "You on a plan, Ethan?" I didn't look at the CEO. "Yes." "For what?" not attending 2 culture syncs, and for resisting new nomenclature. I called a module by the name we used in production, and then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. Chris broke first. This is being taken out of context. We have to modernize. The old approach was brittle. I kept my voice level. The old approach ran 99% uptime across 3 winters, with driver shortages, and a blizzard that shut half the Midwest. Because we refactored it, Chris snapped. We changed the folder names, I said. A couple of the client's people looked down to hide their faces. It wasn't a laugh, exactly. It was the sound of second-hand embarrassment trying to find a chair. The CEO leaned forward, palms templed. Ethan is a valued contributor, but we've moved far beyond that original, Mark cut him, far beyond or sideways with better fonts. He didn't wait for an answer. Tell me about the Memphis rollover last November. Chris opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I could see him trying to remember a bullet point that didn't exist. I kept my eyes on the table. We pulled the risk model off Friday routes with a dynamic buffer around high wind alerts. It saved 6 rigs. Dispatch wanted to push. We said no. Mark nodded once, slow. A small click sounded as he capped his pen. A tiny sound, but it felt like a stamp. That was the first pocket of air I'd had in months. A miniature relief, not victory, micro-catharsis. All right, Mark said, tone turning almost conversational. Why am I hearing legacy and plan about the one person in the room who answers questions I didn't put on the slide? My manager tried another lane. Ethan's brilliant. No one's disputing that. But founders have blind spots. They get attached. Probably, I said before the CEO could agree for me. I'm attached to trucks, not flipping. A few heads tipped. The CEO put on his softest voice. You can hear the passion. It's admirable. But this is a scale game now. We need leaders who can sell the story. Mark's jaw flexed. I don't base stories. I buy outcomes. He turned to me. How big can you go without breaking what works? Big, I said. If you stage by Lane family and don't promise the moon to sales before the staging is done. And if sales promises the moon, you turn off the telescope. Mark smiled, a crease that looked like it hadn't shown up at many vendor meetings. It faded quick. Good. Last question. If you disagree with leadership on something that affects safety or service levels, what do? I disagree, I said, in writing. The CEO tried to chuckle like we were all reasonable adults. And we value that. We encourage healthy dissent. Chris nodded too hard. We love that. Mark set his pen down parallel to his notepad, squared both to the table edge, then looked at the CEO. Then you won't mind if I ask Ethan 2 hours of technical Q&A this afternoon, just him and my ops people. The CEO hesitated a half-second too long. Of course, he said at last. We're one team. But block my calendar, Chris added quickly, reaching for control. I should be in that thread. Mark shook his head. No need. You've already given me the vision. I felt the heat rise in the room like someone had opened an oven. No drama on my face. Just that steady, quiet heart again. After the formalities, we broke for coffee. In the hallway, Chris fell into step beside me, voice low, smile fixed. Let me be really clear, he said. You will not freelance with the client. Any Q&A goes through me. I'll answer the questions they ask me, I replied. You'll answer what I tell you to answer, he whispered, eyes not exactly meeting mine. You've already given people the wrong idea. What idea is that? That this is your baby. It isn't, I said. I gave it up. He smiled wider like a photo. Exactly. So don't grab it in public. Back in the room, the CEO corralled us with charm. Ethan, quick word. We stepped to the glass. He didn't lower his voice. We're aligned, right? We need to present one face. We do, I said. Great. Then when Mark asks you questions, keep it high level. He asked about sensor deltas. High level. The smile sharpened. And try not to sound territorial. I thought of the PIP document with its bullet points about energy and buy-in. I thought of the weekend I'd spent writing a postmortem. No one read because it didn't fit on a slide. "I'll be accurate," I said. He held my gaze a second longer than polite, then nodded like a man deciding whether to pet a dog that has teeth. At 2, Mark's ops team grabbed a smaller room. No cameras, no theater, just 3 people in shirts that had seen warehouses and bad coffee. They asked real questions. What happens when a carrier fakes location? What's your cutoff for a stale ping? Why is the ETA always wrong on that Denver lane? I answered clean. Where I didn't know, I said I didn't know. Where we'd messed up, I said how and when. One of the ops leads, a woman with pen calluses and a scar across her knuckle, sat back at the end. "Okay," she said. "That's the first honest answer we've had in months." She looked at Mark. "I can work with this." On the way out, in the empty corridor, Mark slowed. He didn't touch my shoulder. He didn't do the patronizing, proud of you thing. He just asked, "You happy here?" I could have dodged. I could have said something about opportunity and growth. "I'm clearly useful," I said. "That's not the same." He nodded like he'd expected that sentence, and had been waiting for me to say it out loud. "We'll circle back," he said, and walked toward the elevators. I went back to my desk and found an email waiting from HR. Reminder: performance check-in tomorrow at 9. Please bring evidence of culture contributions. I stared at the words until they blurred. I thought of the trucks that didn't flip, the drivers who got home, the miles that didn't burn for nothing, the small, non-dramatic miracles no one put on a slide. I thought of my name under a pile of rebrands. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. He turned to me, and I could tell he already knew. The next morning, I walked into the HR meeting like a man walking into a noise he'd already heard before. The room was glass, all transparency and none of it real. 2 people sat across the table, the HR director and Chris. A laptop was open between them, the PIP file glowing like a verdict. "Ethan," the HR director began in that smooth voice people use when they're about to remove your livelihood, "this meeting is a check-in, not a disciplinary step. We just want to align expectations." Chris leaned back, trying for casual authority. "We've noticed a pattern of resistance. You're technically strong, but culturally it's been hard for you to adapt." "Adapt to what?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "To how we do things now. How's that different from how we did them before?" "That's not really the point," he said, glancing at the HR rep. "It is to me," I said, "because if adaptation means letting people take credit for work they don't understand, then yeah, I'm resistant." Her fingers froze above the keyboard. "Ethan, are you saying you feel misrepresented?" "I'm saying this place runs on optics, and I don't do optics." Chris sighed like I was a slow student. "You're a brilliant engineer, but you don't get the business side. Clients don't care who wrote the code. They care about the story." "I think Mark Reynolds cares," I said quietly. That made him blink. "Excuse me?" "He cares about who built the system he's about to trust his entire logistics network to." He recovered fast, but not fast enough. "Ethan, we don't need to make this personal. Let's refocus." I stood. "We are focused." The HR woman tried to steer it back to process. "Let's schedule a follow-up." "No need," I said. "You'll have your paperwork soon." Chris frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning I'm done watching people who don't know what they're holding pretend to lead." I walked out. No dramatics, no slammed doors, just the sound of my badge hitting the desk as I passed reception. Outside, the air felt different. Like I'd stepped out of a theater halfway through the play and finally realized it was a bad script. I didn't have a plan, just a sense of clarity that felt better than any title I'd ever had. By lunch, my phone was full of missed calls. HR, Chris, even the CEO's assistant. I ignored them all. Then around 2 p.m., my email pinged. Subject line: urgent, client follow-up, attendance required. It was from the CEO's office. I almost deleted it. Almost. But something in me wanted to see it through. Not for revenge, but for closure. The next day, I walked into the conference room again. Different energy this time. Tighter, quieter. The CEO was there, so was Chris, both standing near the projector like soldiers before an inspection. Mark and his ops team came in a few minutes later, calm, unreadable. "All right," the CEO said, smiling wide. "Let's keep this efficient." Mark placed his briefcase down, looked at me, then at the CEO. "We've done our due diligence. Your team is passionate. But before we finalize anything, I need one clarification." "Of course," the CEO said, voice bright. Mark's gaze didn't move. "Who holds the IP rights for the core predictive model in this software?" The room went still. Chris looked at me, then at the CEO. The CEO cleared his throat. "The corporation does, obviously. We purchased all rights during the acquisition." "Purchased from whom?" "From the founder of the previous company. I assume that's documented." Mark nodded slowly. "It is." Then after a pause, "Do you know who that founder was?" Silence again. I didn't say a word. Mark turned to me. "Ethan, do you mind reminding them?" Chris went pale. The CEO's jaw clenched, but he didn't stop me. "I was the founder," I said simply. The words landed like a dropped wrench in a quiet workshop. Loud, final, heavy. Mark nodded once. "Right. That's what I thought." He looked at the CEO again. "So when your team kept referring to him as support, you can understand how that changes things for us." The CEO tried to recover. "There's been a misunderstanding." Mark held up a hand. "No, there's been a pattern." He leaned back in his chair, eyes hard now. "You're trying to sell me on innovation built by a man you've buried under bureaucracy. You bought the house and locked out the architect." The CEO's tone sharpened. "Let's not get emotional. We're a large organization. There are layers." "Layers don't impress me," Mark said. "Integrity does." He turned to me. "Ethan, I'd like to speak to you privately after this meeting." That sentence hit harder than any applause could have. Chris tried to interject. "We can all align together?" Mark cut him off. "No. Just Ethan." We stepped into a side room. No corporate lighting, no fake smiles. Just quiet. Mark folded his arms. "I'll be blunt. You built something rare, not just useful, but honest. I've seen hundreds of systems that promise efficiency. Yours actually delivers it, and you've been treated like a liability." "I sold it," I said. "That's on me." "You sold a product, not your self-respect." For the first time in months, I didn't have an answer ready. He continued. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm pulling our contract from them. We'll license directly through your consultancy. You still own part of the IP under the transitional clause, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Clause 9b. Non-exclusive technical use. Limited to internal application." "Perfect," he smiled. "We'll build from there." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I'm not buying software from people who don't understand the hands that built it." A quiet laugh escaped me. It wasn't joy, not yet. Just disbelief wearing a different coat. He handed me a card. "Call me Monday. We'll draft the paperwork. You'll need a lawyer." "Not theirs." When I walked out of that room, Chris was standing near the hallway, pale as the wall behind him. "What did he say?" he demanded. I looked at him, the man who'd called me obsolete in meetings about things he couldn't code himself. "Nothing you'd understand," I said. And then silence again, the kind that feels like gravity switching sides. That night, I stopped being the hero. Not because I failed, but because I stopped saving people who never wanted saving. When people imagine revenge, they picture fireworks, drama, explosions. But the real kind, the kind that lasts, is quiet. The Monday after that meeting, I walked into the office like any other day. My badge still worked. For now, Chris wouldn't look at me. HR avoided eye contact completely. The CEO's assistant handed me a coffee without saying a word, like someone placing flowers at a crime scene. I spent the morning transferring documents. Clean, transparent, by the book. Nothing shady. I downloaded every bit of work that was legally mine under my founder's clause, logged the copies, and left everything else untouched. I even sent an email to IT confirming compliance. When you've been underestimated long enough, clarity feels like rebellion. At noon, I walked into the cafeteria. Conversation stopped. You could feel it, that ripple of confusion that spreads when people realize the power dynamic just flipped and no one sent the memo. Chris sat with his phone on the table, pretending to type. His hands were shaking. He looked up when I passed. "So," he said, trying for casual, "you're talking to Mark now?" I stopped. "We're in touch." "You know, this looks bad," he said. "For you." "How so?" "You're breaching loyalty. That's grounds for termination." I smiled. A real one this time. "You're right. It is." He frowned, unsure whether I was bluffing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you don't have to terminate me," I said. "I quit an hour ago." I dropped my resignation letter on the table. Signed, dated, polite. He blinked. "You... what?" "Effective immediately." "Wait, don't worry," I added. "You'll still have plenty to explain." And then I walked out. By Friday, word had spread. The contract, the one worth 7 figures swoop, was gone. Mark's company had officially withdrawn, citing strategic realignment. Internally, they blamed me, of course. But outside those glass walls, the truth was already making rounds. Turns out, people notice when the CEO of a major client starts taking meetings with an ex-employee in a downtown cafe instead of the corporate office. Mark and I spent 3 hours at that cafe. No suits, no pitch decks, just 2 cups of black coffee and a white napkin covered in sketches. "I don't want to rebuild the same company," he said. "I want to build the right one." I nodded. No buzzwords, no corporate theater. Just results. "Results in decency," I said. He smiled. "Those don't usually come in the same box." "They will this time." A month later, I registered a new company. Just a small operation, me, a designer I trusted, and 2 engineers who'd followed me quietly after the merger. We didn't chase funding rounds or media coverage. We just built. The first client was Mark's firm. The second came through a referral. By the third, I'd stopped checking who still worked at the old place. I didn't need to. The silence told me everything. Chris was transitioned out 3 weeks after the contract loss. The CEO lasted 2 months longer before the board decided his visionary leadership was too expensive to justify. The company restructured again and quietly removed my product from their website. I never said a word about it online. No posts, no gloating. Just the slow, satisfying rhythm of doing work that mattered again. There's this moment. It hits you months after everything's over, when you realize the thing that once hurt you is now just distant. I was sitting in my new office, small but bright, when I found an old notebook from the startup days. Inside was a quote I'd scribbled on a napkin years ago. "Build something worth losing sleep over, but never worth losing yourself for." Back then, it was just an idea. Now it was a warning I'd lived through. I stared at it for a long minute, then closed the notebook and laughed. Not a bitter laugh, just quiet, grounded. The kind of laugh that comes when the storm's long gone and you finally notice the sunlight on your desk. A few weeks later, I got an email. No subject line, no greeting, just, "You won't even talk to me?" It was from Chris. I typed for a minute, deleted, retyped, deleted again. Then I wrote one sentence. "I don't talk to people who only listened when they thought they were in charge." And hit send. That night, I took a walk through the city. It was raining, soft and steady, the kind of rain that cleans the noise out of the air. I passed the old corporate building, same glass, same reflections, and kept walking. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small walking away. People love stories where the underdog wins with a speech or a fight. But in real life, victory sounds more like peace. No applause, no camera flash, just quiet mornings. Work that feels honest. People who look you in the eye. They said I failed at work. They were right. I failed at playing their game. So I built my own. And this time, I kept the name on the door.